Welcome to Story Run, The Vault of the North, Episode 9, The Weight of Empire. The map hadn't gone quiet. It pulsed, slow, watching. 3 in the morning. The flat was dark. Maria was asleep down the hall. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the windows still carried thin trails of water, catching streetlight and stretching it into shapes that moved when Tony looked too long. The map lay folded on his bedside table. It was glowing. Not gold, not red, amber, a color he had never seen from it before. Warm and steady, like a coal that refused to go out. Tony's thumb throbbed. The old mark, the blood seal scar from Scotland, healed months ago, but never quiet. Tonight, it pulsed in time with the glow, as if the map and his body were sharing the same heartbeat. He had not slept well since the keeper test, since Drummond's calm eyes and Isla's hard questions, and the coin that had pulled at something inside him he still did not understand, since he had come within 2 inches of failing. Somewhere beyond the hills and the sea, past 2,000 years of silence, something very old had opened one eye, and it was still watching. Tony sat up, rubbed his face, reached for his jacket. He needed milk, bread, rice, the normal things that kept a life standing upright, while the ground underneath it tried to split open. He dressed in the dark and left the flat quietly. The city was cold. The streets were wet, and his borrowed luck, thinner now, weaker since Wales, sat in his chest like a battery running low. By the time Tony reached the grocery near Ealing Broadway, the sun was a gray rumor behind cloud. The bank card failed on the 3rd try. Tony stared at the chip and pin machine. The cashier waited with the expression of a man who had seen every kind of embarrassment and did not plan to adopt this one. "Sorry," Tony said. "Try again." The cashier did. Same result. Declined. Heat rose into Tony's face. Not panic. Not yet. Just that hard little jolt when the world shifts 1 inch sideways and expects you to pretend it didn't. He tried a different card. Declined. Behind him, someone shifted with a basket of milk and bread. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. The queue grew by 1. The cashier looked up. "You got cash." Tony checked his wallet. Coins. A 10-pound note, folded twice. Not enough for the week's groceries. He forced a smile that did not belong to him. "Yeah, just give me a second." He stepped aside, let the next customer through, and pulled out his phone. No fraud text. No bank call. Just 3 missed notifications from his banking app and 1 message from an unknown number. He opened the banking app first. The screen loaded, then froze, then displayed a line that made his stomach go cold. Temporary restriction. Pending review. Tony stared at it. Not empty. Not stolen. Worse. Frozen. The shop door opened behind him. Cold air slid in. A woman with a pushchair squeezed past, and Tony stepped closer to the window, phone tight in his hand. He opened the message. "This is what personal looks like. You're 10 minutes from making it public. I'd rather not. Eleanor." For a second, the grocery store disappeared. Not literally. He could still hear the till, the rustle of carrier bags, a child asking for crisps, but all of it moved back, like sound heard through water. Eleanor, not a watcher, not a consultant, Not a recruiter with a borrowed smile. Eleanor herself. Tony typed with his thumbs too hard. "What did you do?" The reply came instantly. "Enough to prove I can reach your life without breaking a single law. Walk outside. Alone." Tony looked up. Across the road, beyond the steamed-up front window, a black car waited in a loading bay. Engine on, dark glass. Still, Tony's jaw tightened. His thumb throbbed again. Harder now. Like a warning signal he couldn't switch off. The cashier called. "You still want this stuff?" Tony blinked, forced himself back into the room, shook his head. "No, sorry." He left the basket on the counter and walked out into the cold with his phone in his hand and both fists tight inside his jacket pockets. The black car's rear door clicked open before Tony reached the curb. No driver got out. No bodyguard unfolded from the front seat. Just the door, open, waiting. Tony stopped half a second too long. Then he crossed the road, because if he ran now, she would learn the wrong lesson. And because he was starting to understand something ugly about Eleanor, she liked proof. He got into the car. The inside smelled of leather and rain. Eleanor sat on the far side of the back seat, one ankle over the other, coat perfect, as if the weather had asked permission before touching her. She did not smile. That made it worse. "Antonio." Eleanor's voice was measured, controlled. "Thank you." Tony shut the door hard enough to make a point and sat as far away as the car allowed. "What did you do to my account?" "Nothing permanent." "That wasn't my question." Eleanor folded her hands. "I flagged a sequence of transactions that would trouble any compliance team with a pulse." Tony laughed once. Short, sharp. "So this is blackmail with paperwork?" "No." Eleanor's tone did not shift. "This is a demonstration." The driver pulled away. The shop slid past the window. Tony's stomach tightened. He turned instantly. "Where are we going?" "Nowhere dramatic. 2 streets. You can walk back after." He looked at the glass divider, the locked doors, the neat stitching on the seats. "You really know how to make a person trust you." "I'm not asking for trust." "Then what are you asking for?" Eleanor reached into the folder beside her and placed 3 printed sheets on the seat between them. Tony looked down. Graphs, transaction clusters, dates. A line showing his lottery claim. Another showing the investment spike from Meridian Grid. A third mapping small, unlikely events around him over several months. Missed traffic incidents. Corrected billing errors. Transport timing that made no statistical sense. Minor legal approvals around the flat purchase. A pattern of luck dressed as ordinary life. Tony's mouth went dry. "You've been tracking me. I've been tracking the pattern around you." She tapped the first sheet. "Most people who win money grow noisy in familiar ways. Cars, watches, debts, friends arriving from nowhere." She tapped again. "You grew noisy in a way that made no mathematical sense." Tony kept his face still. "That means nothing." Eleanor tilted her head. "Really?" She slid the second sheet toward him. It was worse. There, overlaid against the financial timeline, were marked vault disturbances. Scotland, London, Wales, dates, locations, lines connecting them. Tony's chest tightened despite himself. Outside, the gray street crawled past. Rain began to spot the windows. Eleanor saw the reaction. Of course, she saw it. "That look," she said softly, "is why I asked you into the car instead of sending lawyers." Tony stared at the paper. This was not guesswork anymore. This was structure. Someone on Eleanor's side had built a machine for looking at the impossible and forcing it to make sense. "You don't understand what you're measuring," Tony said. "No, not fully." Eleanor leaned back slightly. "But I understand enough to know 3 things." She held up one finger. 1. You are an anchor event inside a wider network. A second finger. 2. When your life tilts, geography tilts with it. A third. And 3. Her voice dropped half a degree. If I prove the first 2 to the wrong institutions, your money disappears, your flat becomes difficult, and your mother's life fills with people in suits who enjoy questions. Something dangerous moved in Tony's chest. Not the old fortune. Not the sensing he had lost in Scotland. Anger. Clean and hot. Don't use her. Eleanor's expression did not change. "I prefer not to. Which is why I am here personally." The car stopped under a railway bridge. Rain tapped the roof in quick metallic bursts. Water slid down the arches in silver threads. Tony looked at her. "You froze my account to make a point." "Yes, you're threatening my mother to make a second point. I am showing you the cost of refusing structure." That phrase sat in the car like a blade. Tony almost opened the door and walked into the rain. Almost. His hand moved. Stopped. Then Eleanor pulled one last document from the folder. A passport. Not his. Italian. Temporary movement papers. Keeper-style quiet paperwork. Except neater. Cleaner. Corporate. Tony looked up. Eleanor said, "There is movement in Rome." He said, "Nothing." "I suspect you already know that." Tony thought of the amber glow on the map, the pulsing warmth he had watched from his bed 3 hours ago. How the network never waited for anyone to sort out their feelings first. Eleanor continued. A Roman-era node, buried under layered infrastructure, water systems, collapse risk, heritage protections. Exactly the sort of place where behavior matters more than force. Tony's eyes narrowed. "You want me to open it for you?" "No. I want you to stop pretending this is still about you saying no in warehouses." She leaned forward slightly. "You've been tested." "Fine. Wonderful." The patience in her voice was thin and polished. "But the network does not care about your moral self-image. It cares about outcome. If Rome falls apart, people die under stone built by an empire that still thinks gravity works for it." Tony swallowed. There it was. Not gold. Not power. Not a house in Richmond or a safer schedule for Maria. Pressure. Real pressure. A place. Civilians. Collapse. The sort of thing that made refusal more expensive than virtue, like to admit. Eleanor pressed. "I am offering structure, legal cover, movement, intelligence. A controlled response team." She counted each one like a card laid flat. "Your accounts are restored. Your mother is untouched. You work with me in Rome. No tricks, no ownership." Tony almost laughed. "Together, yes?" He looked at the frozen graphs again. "You built all this from bank records and timing noise, and from the fact that you keep being near impossible things and surviving them." The rain got harder. Water hammered the bridge above in waves. Tony looked out the window at the wall sliding with water and felt, for 1 second, like he was back under the cliff in Wales with the sea climbing the tunnel and no clean answer anywhere. Then he looked back at Eleanor. What happens if I say no? She met his eyes. Your account review lasts longer. Tony waited. She did not soften the second part. And Rome becomes less controlled. Tony stared at her. That was the genius of it. Not a pure lie. Not a pure threat. A trap built from partial truths. Who else is going? He asked. Eleanor's eyes sharpened. Just a fraction. First, real victory of the conversation. My team. And if they're as responsible as they claim, some version of your keepers? Tony exhaled through his nose. This was not a kidnapping. Not exactly. It was a race dressed as collaboration. He reached for the door handle. The locks clicked open at once. She had been ready for that too. Tony paused and looked at her one last time. You know what your problem is. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. One of them? You think being right in pieces adds up to being right. The faintest flicker touched her mouth. Not amusement. Respect, maybe, or the nearest thing she allowed near it. And you, she said, think refusing ownership makes you free. Tony opened the door. Before stepping out, he looked back. Unfreeze my account. Eleanor held his gaze. Go home. Check again in 20 minutes. Then answer the Rome question properly. He stepped into the rain and shut the door behind him. The black car pulled away so smoothly, it barely looked real. Tony stood under the bridge, soaked in seconds, and felt the whole city lean the wrong way. Ruth was already in the flat when he got home. That should have startled him more than it did. But the day had used up its surprises. She stood in the kitchen with Maria, both of them holding mugs. Maria looked tired, suspicious, and a little too polite, which meant Ruth had arrived under some thin excuse, and Maria was not buying all of it. Tony stopped in the doorway. Water dripped from his jacket onto the floor. Maria turned first. Anthony, you're wet. Ruth looked at him once and knew immediately that wet was not the headline. Tea? Maria asked. Tony blinked. Yeah? Maria looked between him and Ruth. Then she set the kettle back on and said, Good. You two clearly have one of your strange conversations to do. She left for the sitting room with the dignity of a woman who knew more than people told her and intended to remember that later. The moment she was gone, Ruth set her mug down. Eleanor? Tony nodded. How personal. She froze my bank account, showed me anomaly charts, invited me to Rome like it was a school trip. Ruth's face became very still. Your account? Tony took out his phone and opened the banking app. Restored. Everything live again. Every number back where it belonged. He held up the screen. Demonstration over. Ruth's jaw tightened. She's moving faster. Tony leaned on the counter. The kitchen light hummed above them. That's not the best part. She's got correlation data. My money, Scotland, Wales. She can't see everything, but she can see enough. Ruth said nothing for 2 seconds. Then, did she mention the source? No? Then she's built an external model. She's learning to map consequence without permission. Tony gave a flat smile. That sounds bad, in a very keeper way. Ruth turned to face him fully, her arms crossed. Rome is real. Tony went still. You knew. We suspected movement. Did you know it was this soon? No. That at least sounded honest. The Roman node was quiet for a long time, Ruth said. Deep sight, layered over. Difficult to reach, which usually means safer. Usually? Usually? Tony shook his head. That word is doing terrible work for everyone lately. Ruth did not smile. What does Eleanor want there? Tony asked. Control. He shook his head again. She says people could die. Ruth held his gaze. She may be right. That hit harder than the threat had. Tony looked down at the bank balance on his phone and hated the way relief and dread now lived in the same square of light. So what now? He asked. Ruth considered him. Now you choose whether you go to Rome because Eleanor pushed you or because the network moved. Tony let out a breath. That's not much of a choice. No, Ruth said, but it is still a real one. From the sitting room, Maria called. Anthony, are you eating or doing dramatic secret business until midnight? Tony shut his eyes briefly. Ruth, to her credit, looked almost human for half a second. Eat? She said. You? I've already eaten. That wasn't the question. Ruth picked up her mug again. Fine. Toast. Maria had made quick garlic rice and eggs with tomatoes because it was what existed in the flat, and because real life insisted on being fed even when ancient networks were developing opinions about you. Tony sat at the table. Damp hair, dry jumper, pulse still too high. Ruth sat opposite, like she had spent her whole life appearing harmless in kitchens and failing only on the details. Maria watched both of them over her mug. The radiator ticked in the corner. Finally, she said, So, Ruth. Ruth looked up. Maria, you seem to appear whenever my son becomes more tired than usual. Tony nearly choked on rice. Ruth answered with calm that bordered on annoying. That is a fair pattern. Maria pointed her fork at Ruth. I don't like patterns. I'm not allowed to understand. Tony muttered, Mum? No. Maria's voice did not rise, but it hardened. I have been patient. I have been respectful. I have allowed strange people with coats and unfinished answers into my life because Anthony has looked at them as if he already knows I should not shout. Ruth put down her fork. Good move, Tony thought. Bad moment to look casual. Maria continued. But I am still his mother. So tell me one thing true. Silence sat down at the table with them. Tony could hear the clock in the sitting room. Tony looked at Ruth. Ruth looked at Maria. Then Ruth said, Your son is involved in something that became dangerous the moment he tried to handle it alone. Maria took that in without blinking. That I already knew, she said. Another. Ruth glanced at Tony once, asking a question without moving her face. Tony gave the smallest nod. Ruth said, There are people who think Anthony can help them get what they want. Some of those people are willing to hurt others to pressure him. My job is to reduce that risk. Maria sat back slowly. She was quiet long enough that the radiator ticked 3 times. Then she said, And are you good at your job? Ruth answered honestly, Usually. Maria looked at her for another beat, then at Tony, then back to Ruth. I don't like usually either. For the first time that evening, Tony almost smiled. Maria saw it, and her expression softened by 1 degree. Then she pointed the fork at Tony instead. And you, Tony froze. Yes, you will stop deciding alone what I can survive. That landed harder than Eleanor's folder. Tony looked down. Maria's voice softened. but not by much. "I am not asking for every secret," she said, "but I am done being protected like a child from things that are already knocking on my door." Tony swallowed. "Okay." She studied him, deciding whether that word was worth anything. Then she nodded once and went back to eating. Ruth said quietly, "She'd do well with Layla." Tony muttered, "Please don't recruit my mother." Maria, without looking up, said, "Too late." The map woke at 1:13 in the morning. Tony had been half asleep on top of the duvet, phone in hand, trainer still on, because real rest had become the sort of luxury the network liked to interrupt. A pulse of heat ran through the backpack on the chair, stronger than before. Not the soft amber of earlier, something sharper. He sat up immediately. The room was dark, except for the streetlight leaking through the curtain. Tony pulled the map out, unfolded it across the bed, and felt his throat tighten. Italy had gone gold. Not the soft, watchful gold of Scotland before the first vault. This was harsher, thinner, a line cutting through Rome, and downward beneath it, branching like cracks in old plaster. At the center of the glow sat a new symbol, not the closed eye, not the Welsh fracture. A laurel wreath broken, clean through. Tony stared. The gold flickered. His thumb answered with a pulse of its own. The blood seal mark reminding him that his body was still connected to every vault he had touched. Then the symbol shifted. For half a second, the broken laurel became something else. A crown. Then stone falling. Then a doorway underwater. Then it snapped back into a broken wreath and held there, trembling. Tony heard movement at his door and looked up. Isla stood in the hallway in a dark coat, hair still damp from rain, as if she had stepped out of the city rather than arrived through it. Tony blinked once. "You people are getting worse at normal entrances." She crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe. "Ruth, let me in." That tracked. Tony looked back at the map. "How long have you been here?" Long enough to hear Maria ask if all keeper coats are emotionally unfriendly. Tony actually smiled at that. Tiny, brief. Then Isla stepped closer and saw the gold. The smile vanished from both of them. "That's not subtle," Isla said. "No. Rome?" "Yeah." She leaned over the bed, reading the branching lines. Tony noticed she did not touch the paper. Not because she was afraid, because she respected rules more than she showed. "That symbol changed," he said. "What did you see?" He told her. Crown, collapse, water, broken, laurel. Isla's eyes narrowed, the way they always did when turning information into shape. "Roman civic power," she said quietly. "Victory, empire, public image, buried water systems." She straightened. "None of that is comforting." Tony looked at her. "That is a surprisingly bad speech before a mission." "I'm not here to give speeches." He exhaled. "Eleanor wants me in Rome." "I know." He stared. "Of course, you do." She contacted 3 separate aviation channels inside 6 hours and tried to book a legal emergency heritage inspection under a shell organization with terrible taste in names. Isla's tone was flat and precise. "She's not subtle when she's in a hurry." Tony blinked. "Did you just insult her administration?" "I did." That almost made him laugh again, which felt strange in the middle of this. The map pulsed once between them, as if impatient. He looked back at it. "So what's the keeper answer?" "Don't go because she wants me there. or go because the node's waking. Isla was quiet for a moment. The streetlight shifted through the curtain. Then she said, "The keeper answer is annoying. Fantastic. You go. But not because she summoned you. Because the map moved. Because Rome matters. And because if Eleanor gets there first with only people who think everything is a system to own, the underground gets very dangerous very quickly." Tony nodded slowly. There it was. Not a choice between going and not going. A choice between who set the terms. He leaned back against the headboard. "You're coming." Isla looked at him. That wasn't a question. No. Something softened at the edge of her face. Not much. Just enough to prove she was made of something other than discipline and weather. "Good," she said. "Because I already packed." Tony looked at the map again. The lines in Rome deepened. Beneath the gold, he could almost see layers. Streets over stone. Churches over baths. Apartments over old channels, where water once fed an empire that had expected to last forever. "Why Rome?" he asked. Isla answered without hesitation. "Because empire leaves weight. And vaults remember weight." That line sat in the room and did not move. Tony rubbed at the mark on his thumb. "You know what Eleanor said? She said, 'I think refusing ownership makes me free.'" Isla leaned one shoulder against the wall. "And what do you think?" Tony looked at the broken laurel on the map. "I think she keeps mistaking refusal for weakness." Isla's gaze stayed on him. Sharp, measuring, but not distant, in the same way it had been before. "Then make sure Rome teaches her better." A beat passed. Then the gold flared. Both of them looked down. A fresh line tore itself across the map, branching below the city center and ending in one small dark point beneath handwritten Latin Tony had never learned and somehow half understood anyway. Where conquest entered, humility must descend. Tony read it once. Then again, his mouth went dry. "Humility," he said. Isla looked at the words. "That sounds like a vault rule." "Yeah, those are always nicer. Before they become practical." The map pulsed again. Under the new line, a final shape formed. Not a vault door. Not yet. A stairway, spiraling down beneath running water. Tony stared. He could feel it already. Not the old lost sensing. Nothing supernatural. Just the instinctive certainty of someone who had done this too many times for 19 years old. Rome was not going to start at the vault. It was going to start in motion. Under a city. With water. And with Eleanor already halfway there. He folded the map carefully. "When do we leave?" Isla checked her watch. 4 hours. Tony looked toward the dark window. The city outside. His mother asleep down the hall. The flat he had bought with money that now felt less like success, and more like a signal fired into the wrong sky. Then he stood. "Right," he said. "Let's go and have a terrible time in Italy." Isla's mouth moved. Barely. "Now you sound ready." Tony grabbed his bag. Down the hall, the floorboard outside Maria's room creaked once, and a sleepy voice called through the door. "Anthony?" He stopped. "Yes, Mom?" A pause. The flat held its breath. Then, softer. "Come back from this one too." Tony closed his eyes for half a second, then opened them. "I will." He did not know if that was promise, prayer, or bluff. Maybe all three. Dawn was still gray when they left Heathrow. The flight south took under 3 hours, but felt longer. Tony sat by the window and watched the continent shift beneath cloud cover. France became a blur. The Alps caught one edge of early sun, bright enough to make him squint. Then Italy rose beneath them, green and gold and old. Isla sat beside him and said almost nothing. She read a slim keeper file on Roman-era vault records, turning pages with the focused silence of someone who expected trouble and intended to recognize it before it arrived. Tony's thumb throbbed twice during descent. Both times, the map shifted in his bag. Restless, Callum met them on the ground in Rome, not at the airport, at a service road off the Via Appia, where a rented van sat between 2 construction barriers and a man in a high-visibility vest pretended to be surveying a drain. "Ruth's already south of the city," Callum said, tossing Tony a headlamp. "The site is unstable. Heritage fencing went up 3 days ago, but the locals have been hearing sounds underground for a week." Tony looked at the headlamp, then at the road, then at the distant edge of a ruined wall, visible past a line of umbrella pines. Heat rose from the tarmac in thin waves. Old Rome, sitting under new Rome, he thought. The whole city was a layered argument with itself. "Eleanor?" Isla asked. Callum's jaw tightened. "Already in the country. Her people were seen near the eastern ruins last night. She's not wasting time." Tony felt the map shift in his bag again. A slow, heavy pulse. The kind that felt less like a signal and more like a heartbeat. Italy was awake, and it was not patient. They moved quickly through a gap in the heritage fencing, down a gravel slope to a partially exposed dig site where old Roman foundations broke through the dirt like bones through skin. Scaffolding braced a stone archway that opened into darkness. Tony paused at the entrance. The air coming up from below was cold and carried the smell of standing water and old mortar. Somewhere deep inside, a faint dripping echoed off stone. Isla stopped beside him and looked at the dark opening. "You know," she said, "most people who visit Rome eat pasta and take photos. I can still eat pasta after crawling into a collapsing ruin, especially after." She almost smiled. Almost. Then the ground shuddered. Not hard, just enough to send loose gravel bouncing down the slope. A crack appeared in the mortar between 2 exposed foundation stones. New, fresh. Callum steadied himself on the scaffolding. "That's the 3rd one today." Tony looked at Isla. She looked at Tony. They went in. The passage dropped without warning. Tony had 1 second to realize the stone under him was no longer floor, and another second to slam his shoulder into Isla as the ledge gave way. They went down together. Not far, maybe 8 feet. But the landing was bad. Broken slabs, dust, loose fragments of old Roman brick, and Tony hit hard enough to lose his breath. The lamp clipped from his belt spun across the chamber floor and flashed wild yellow over old walls, carved figures, a black pool. Then darkness again. For half a second, no one moved. Then Isla pushed herself up on one elbow and said through gritted teeth, "If that was your plan, it needs work." Tony sucked air back into his lungs. "Nice to know you're all right." Didn't say that. Above them, the hole they had fallen through looked like a cut in the ceiling. Dust sifted down in pale threads. Somewhere beyond it, feet scraped stone. Callum's voice echoed from above. "Tony, we're here." Tony shouted back. The answer came thin through the broken opening. "Hold position." Tony almost laughed at that. Hold position. in a buried Roman chamber, under half-collapsed masonry, with acquirers somewhere in the ruins, and a vault waking beneath them. He found the lamp and lifted it. The chamber around them was not natural. Roman, yes, but older things sat underneath. The room had once been rectangular. Then someone had cut deeper, carving a circular depression into the center of the floor where black water sat perfectly still. Around that pool ran a ring of mosaic, though much of it had cracked. What remained showed eagles, laurel, soldiers in profile, and beneath them, another pattern trying to push through. Something older, less proud. Curved lines, interlocking eyes, the language of vaults. Trapped under empire. Tony stared at it. The water did not move, but the air above it felt heavier, as if the pool was holding something down. Rome had found something here, and instead of leaving it alone, it had built on top of it, claimed it, framed it with conquest, turned a threshold into a monument. Isla got to her feet more carefully this time, brushed dust from her sleeve. Talk. Tony kept the lamp low and moved around the edge of the black pool. They built a chamber over the vault. You can tell that from broken tiles? I can tell because they used power like it belonged to them. He pointed at the mosaic. Look, the Roman image is the top layer, but the pattern underneath is older. Isla crouched beside the cracked ring and brushed away grit with her fingertips. Her face changed. Not fear, not exactly, but recognition sharpening into respect. You're right, she said. Then she tilted her head. But we don't know what the older layer wants yet. Don't get ahead of the room. Above them, another crash. Not close, not yet, but nearer than before. Tony turned toward the sound. They're still coming. Of course they are. Isla straightened, one hand brushing her collar where the calm sat. Eleanor never travels for scenery. He swept the lamp toward the far wall and finally saw the inscription. Not Latin, not entirely. Someone had started in Latin, formal and imperial, then run out of control halfway through and begun adding other marks between the lines. Corrections, warnings, a confession, carved by people who realized too late what they had built over. Tony stepped closer. A stone shifted under his boot. Dust fell. The Latin was worn, but enough remained. To dominion, order. To victory, memory. To those who enter. The city endures. Underneath, scratched later and in a rougher hand, it takes from the conqueror first. Do not claim. Do not name. Kneel, or it will teach you. Tony felt something cold move through him. Humility. He murmured. Isla looked over. What? The vault test. He pointed at the warning. Scotland tested restraint. Wales tested surrender. This. He looked at the Roman layer over the older one. This tests pride, conquest, ownership. And Rome failed. Tony gave her a dry glance. Quite a clue. Yeah. A stone clattered from the broken ceiling. It hit the far wall and shattered into dust. The pool trembled once. This time, Callum's voice came sharper, there through the outer gallery. Tony stepped back from the wall and lifted the lamp over the black pool. The water did not reflect properly. That was the first wrong thing. The second was that the light sank into it too deeply, as if the pool had more depth than the chamber allowed. The third was the ripple, not from falling grit, not from vibration. The pool moved in response to Tony. A circle spread outward from the exact point where the light touched it, and for 1 second, Tony felt what he had felt before vault openings. Not invitation, not welcome, recognition. The map in his bag warmed. His thumb pulsed with it. Isla saw his expression and followed his gaze. What is it doing? Tony swallowed. Not the pool. Me. A low hum began beneath the floor. The water darkened by a shade. Above them, boots hammered across stone. Too many. Too fast. Then a voice dropped into the chamber from the broken opening above. Eleanor, you really do find the interesting rooms first, Tony. Her tone was calm, almost amused, which made Tony want to throw something. He stepped back from the pool and looked up. She stood at the broken edge above them, outlined by dust and lantern light. Coat marked with ruin dust, but otherwise composed. 2 acquirer operatives flanked her. Marcus stood behind them, tablet in one hand, jaw tight. Eleanor looked down at the chamber the way a collector might look at a locked cabinet in an auction room. Then she saw the mosaic ring, then the pool. And even from below, Tony could tell the moment her interest deepened into hunger. There you are, she said softly. Tony's voice came out rougher than he intended. Funny. We were saying the same about your conscience. Eleanor's mouth almost moved, still deflecting with sarcasm. Means you haven't made the worst choice yet. Isla moved closer to Tony's side, not touching, ready. Eleanor saw that too. She saw everything. That was the problem. She tilted her head toward Isla. I expected the keepers to send someone older. Isla's answer was immediate. We expected the acquirers to send someone wiser. Disappointing evening all round. Marcus winced slightly. Tony caught it. Eleanor did not. Eleanor stepped nearer the edge. Antonio, her voice cooled into business. I'm done circling the issue. What's beneath you isn't just symbolic, it's a command node. Roman attempt, vault architecture underneath layered access. Her eyes lifted to his. Whoever understands that chamber first controls more than a single site. Tony glanced once at the scratched warning again. It takes from the conqueror first. He looked back up at her. You should come down then. That earned a tiny silence. Marcus looked at Eleanor. Isla looked at Tony like he had just volunteered both of them for execution. Tony kept his face blank, because the truth had arrived whole in his chest a second earlier. Eleanor was making the same mistake Rome had made. She thought she was studying a vault. She was already inside its test. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. You think this is a trap for me? Tony shrugged. I think history gets repetitive when nobody learns. A pulse shivered through the chamber floor. Dust fell from 3 new cracks in the ceiling. The pool darkened. The mosaic ring lit. Not brightly, but enough to make the older symbols under the Roman image show through like bones under skin. Marcus breathed. Eleanor, she did not look away from Tony. What did you activate? Tony answered honestly. I stood here. That was when the chamber changed. The black pool did not rise. The room around it did, or seemed to. Stone columns appeared where there had been none. A ring of them, ghost pale, formed from light and memory. The broken Roman walls stretched upward into a version of themselves, whole and unbroken. The mosaic repaired itself in sweeping patterns of eagle and empire, then cracked again as the older vault geometry pushed through. Tony staggered 1 step back. Isla caught his arm. Stay with the room, she said quietly. Don't let it narrate you. Excellent sentence, Tony thought. Eleanor went still above them. The two operatives shifted uneasily, and one actually stepped back from the opening. His boot sent a fragment of stone spinning into the dark. The chamber was no longer only a chamber. It was also an echo, a place showing what had been done here. The columns brightened. Figures appeared between them. Roman officials in white-bordered togas, officers in armor, workers carrying stone, scribes, slaves, all rendered in that same pale memory light. They moved silently, crossing and recrossing the chamber around the central pool as if trapped in a loop. One figure stood above the others. A governor, maybe. Military authority in ceremonial dress. One hand over the black water. Face proud, lifted, convinced. Tony watched the memory with cold certainty. He claimed it, he said. The memory governor spoke, though no sound came at first. Then the chamber translated. Not into Latin, not exactly, but into meaning pushed straight into Tony's understanding. Rome does not kneel. Rome orders. Rome keeps what it finds. The pool convulsed. The memory governor smiled in triumph for half a second. Then the black water rose. Not like liquid, but like a hand closing. The governor's face changed, not to pain, to comprehension. Too late. The column light flared. The silent Roman figures dropped to their knees one by one around the chamber. Heads bowed. All except the governor. He tried to remain standing, and the chamber broke him first. The memory dissolved in a shockwave of dark light that cracked across the room and vanished. Tony flinched. The air went thin. Isla's grip tightened once, then released. Above them, no one spoke. Then Marcus said, very quietly, it stripped him. Tony looked up. Marcus was staring not at the pool, but at the scratched warning beneath the Latin lines, as if he had finally seen it as something more than old graffiti. Eleanor recovered first. Of course she did. Recorded dominance inversion, she said, already half back inside analysis. The vault turns hierarchy against the claimant. Tony nearly laughed from disbelief. You watched a buried Roman governor get destroyed for trying to own a vault, and your response is to turn it into a summary point. Eleanor looked down at him, calm as a winter knife. Understanding things quickly is why I'm still alive. No. Tony held her gaze. Knowing when not to touch them is why I am. That hit. Tiny, but real. Marcus looked away. The floor pulsed again. The cracks in the mosaic widened by a fraction. The pool was waking harder now. And Tony understood the danger all at once. This vault did not want spectators. It wanted posture. It wanted everyone in the room to declare themselves. And if Eleanor forced entry, physically or verbally, the chamber would escalate. He turned to Isla. We need the keepers out of the upper gallery. Already working on it. She touched the small comm at her collar. Callum, withdraw the line. Nobody claims the chamber. Nobody names it. Repeat. Callum's voice came thin through static. Understood. Eleanor heard enough to know she was losing the tempo. She lifted her chin slightly. Marcus. Marcus looked at her. And Tony saw the split-second conflict in his face. Then Marcus reached into his pack and brought out a compact device. Metallic, ringed, ugly, in a purposeful way. Tony's stomach dropped. Don't? Marcus hesitated. His hand hovered. Eleanor did not. Deploy resonance map. Minimal field. Tony stepped forward. This place punishes control. Marcus looked from Tony to the device to the chamber. Water trembled in the pool behind them. And that was the first crack Tony had seen in him. Not rebellion, not yet doubt. Isla saw it too. She lifted her voice, not to Eleanor, but to Marcus. You're not mapping a room. You're entering a judgment. And you know it. Marcus's hand tightened on the device. His knuckles whitened. Eleanor's voice sharpened. Now. Marcus threw it. The device hit the far side of the chamber floor and unfolded in a burst of metal limbs, anchoring itself against the stone. A low blue pulse spread out from it, like a ripple. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the vault answered. The black pool rose in a perfect vertical sheet. Not high, just waist level. A wall of dark water standing where gravity said it should fall. The mosaic ring blazed, and every Roman memory figure reappeared at once. Not kneeling now, but turning their heads toward the acquirer device, like a crowd noticing an insult. Tony felt the chamber's meaning strike him like cold steel. Again. You measure what you would master. The device shrieked. Blue current arced across the floor, then bent backward into itself. One of Marcus's operatives shouted and stumbled as the pulse hit his equipment harness. He went down hard, slamming into the broken ledge above the chamber. "Shut it down," Marcus shouted. "I'm trying." The chamber did not care. The standing wall of black water folded outward, not touching anyone, but the pressure from it hit the room like a fist. Dust blasted from the walls. Old Roman stone split with a crack like gunfire. A deep grinding sound ran through the floor beneath Tony's boots, and hairline fractures spread across the mosaic ring. The ceiling groaned. 2 fist-sized stones broke free and hit the water, sending spray across Tony's face. Above them, the broken edge where Eleanor stood shifted. Isla looked up. Move. Too late. A slab tore free from the ledge and dropped exactly where Eleanor had been standing a split second before. She sprang back, fast, disciplined, not graceful now but alive, and the stone shattered where her feet had been. Fragments sprayed upward. One of her operatives dragged the stunned second operative clear just as the upper floor partially gave way. Marcus shut the device down manually with a brutal wrench of his hand. The blue pulse died. The black water dropped back into stillness. Silence crashed down after it. Not peace, just the pause after a warning shot. But the chamber was not done punishing. Dust continued to fall from fresh cracks in the ceiling. The mosaic ring had fractured in 2 new places. The black pool held a faint tremor that had not been there before. Whatever the device had measured, the measurement itself had left a wound. Tony breathed hard. Dust clung to his face and coat. Across from him, Isla was covered in the same powder, one side of her hair loose now, eyes bright with concentration. Above, Eleanor looked down through drifting grit. Her calm was dented, not broken, but dented. A thin scratch marked her cheek where a fragment had caught her. Tony took that small gift and used it immediately. "You still think partnership sounds sensible?" he called up. Eleanor said nothing for 3 long seconds. Then, "No. I think escalation does." Tony hated how honest that sounded. Marcus crouched near the broken edge and looked down. Not at the pool now, but at Tony. "Did it respond to you first?" Tony did not answer. Marcus pressed. "Tony." Eleanor's head turned toward him. A warning. Marcus ignored it. Tony saw the strain in his face. Not loyalty, exactly. Investment. A man who had built his whole mind around systems being knowable. and was now staring into one that refused to behave like property. Tony made the call in the space of one breath. "It responds to posture," he said. "Not bloodline, not wealth, not force." Isla glanced sharply at him, because, Tony thought, if one brick comes loose, the whole acquirer wall might shift. Marcus frowned. Posture meaning it knows when you're trying to own it. Above, Eleanor's voice cut clean through. "Enough." Marcus stopped. There it was, the hierarchy in public. The Roman mistake in a modern coat. Tony saw Marcus feel it. Not fully, but enough. The chamber pulsed once more, softly, like it had noticed too. Eleanor drew herself up and looked directly at Tony. "Last offer, come out of that chamber. Come with me voluntarily. I freeze all personal pressure, your mother, your assets, your education. Full stop, no games." Her voice was steady as iron. "In return, you stop pretending you can manage this network with instinct and guilt." Tony was so tired of hearing sensible evil spoken well. He looked at her and thought of Maria in the new flat. Thought of the first real sleep she had had. Thought of the fact that Eleanor absolutely could make parts of life easier. And thought of what the chamber had just shown him. Conquest never starts by calling itself conquest. It starts by calling itself order. "No," he said. Eleanor held his gaze. Then she gave the tiniest nod. "Not agreement. Decision. Then we leave Italy with different goals," she said. She turned. Marcus did not move. Marcus. He looked at her, then at Tony, then at the chamber again. The pool trembled between them. For 1 second, Tony thought he might refuse, but Marcus stood. He signaled the operatives, and the acquirers withdrew from the broken upper gallery with the speed of people who knew when a room had turned against them. Their footsteps faded, then vanished. Silence again. This time, it stayed. Tony looked up at the broken opening and let out a slow breath. "They're gone." Isla did not relax. For now. And that device left damage. Can you feel it? Tony could. The chamber's anger had not fully settled. The tremor in the pool was still there. The cracks in the mosaic had not healed. "Yeah," he said. "The rooms still hurt." Above, Callum's voice came through the comm. "Upper line clear. Ruth is heading around to the western access. There's another way down." Tony looked back at the pool. The black water was calm again, but the mosaic still showed the older pattern beneath the Roman image now. The empire layer had been cracked open, like the vault had made its point and was waiting for the next honest thing. Isla stepped beside him. "So," she said, dusting grit from her sleeve, "is it just me, or did you bait Eleanor into proving the room right?" Tony stared at the pool. "Mostly accident." Annoying answer. Honest one. She watched him for a beat, then nodded toward the central ring. "What now?" Tony looked again at the scratched warning. "Do not claim. Do not name. Kneel, or it will teach you." Then at the Roman memory's fate. Then at his own boots. "Now," he said quietly, "I stop standing like I'm in charge." He set the lamp down, stepped onto the cracked mosaic ring, and knelt. The chamber answered at once, not with violence, not with fear, with release. The pressure in the air eased. The old columns of memory returned, but softer now. Not A court. A witness. Around the chamber, the silent Roman figures appeared again. Yet this time, they did not kneel in panic. They lowered their heads in something closer to acknowledgement. The fractures from the device stopped spreading. The tremor in the pool steadied and went still. The black pool lit from below. Gold. Deep. Moving like fire beneath the surface. Tony kept his head bowed. He could feel Isla watching, but he did not look up. He spoke carefully, because this chamber hated ownership, and he had no interest in becoming the next cautionary memory. "I didn't come to take this," he said. "I came because your fracture touched people who didn't choose any of this. I'm asking for closure, not control." The gold beneath the water steadied. The chamber translated its reply not as a voice, but as comprehension arriving whole. The city of conquest, built over a door and called it empire. What do you call power you do not keep? Tony's knees ached on the cracked stone. Water seeped through the mosaic, cold against his skin. He thought of Scotland, of giving back knowledge, of Wales, of surrendering fortune residue, of everything the network had taken, and everything it had shown. Then he answered, "Burden." The pool flashed. A ring of light ran through the mosaic and back again, illuminating the older vault geometry completely now. The Roman eagles dimmed. The chamber walls shuddered once, then settled. Isla inhaled sharply. The chamber asked again, "And if burden could make you great?" Tony shut his eyes for a second. There it was, the ugly, sweet center of it. Not simple greed, meaning, the chance to become large enough that no one could overlook him again. Large enough to reshape his mother's life, outmaneuver Eleanor, protect everyone, be the exception to the rule. That was always the real temptation, not money. Justification. The gold beneath the water pulsed once. Warm, inviting, patient. It would wait for him to say yes. It had all the time in the world. Tony opened his eyes, looked into the black gold water. Then it would still cost other people more than it costs me. Silence. Deep. Complete. As if the chamber had stopped breathing to listen. Then the water lowered until it sat flat and dark again, though gold still moved under it like a hidden current. A section of the far wall unlocked with a grinding release. Not a door, exactly. More a stone panel withdrawing into age-black grooves. Behind it stood a narrow pedestal. On the pedestal rested a small object. Not grand, not dramatic. A bronze seal ring, heavily worn, its face engraved not with any family crest, but with a broken laurel crossed by a line. Humility imposed on victory, restraint over dominion. Tony rose slowly. His knees protested. Isla stepped nearer, but stopped short of the ring itself. "That doesn't feel decorative." "No," Tony said. The chamber translated again. The governor claimed. The city broke him. Take nothing. Leave the mark that ends claim. Tony understood. Not reward. Function. A closure device. He approached the pedestal carefully and took the ring. The metal was cold for half a second, then warm, then neither, more like it adjusted itself to the fact of his hand. His blood seal mark flared, once in recognition, the moment he touched it. The chamber showed him what it wanted. Not a vision, a sequence of acts. The Roman inscription on the wall. The older vault, marks beneath it. The need to cancel the claim layer. without destroying the threshold underneath. He turned to Isla. I need to break the Roman declaration. Symbolically? No. Properly. Of course. She almost smiled. Because nothing in your life is ever symbolic. Ruth's voice came from the new western opening. We're in. A moment later, she and Callum emerged into the chamber from a lower side passage, both dusty, both armed with more practicality than ceremony. Ruth took in the pool, the memory light, the ring in Tony's hand, and understood immediately. Status? Vault responsive, Isla said. Acquirers withdrew. Tony is apparently on speaking terms with Roman shame. Excellent. Ruth crossed the chamber in 3 strides. Very usable. Tony was already moving toward the carved wall. He slid the bronze ring over his thumb. Not a perfect fit, but close enough, and pressed its engraved face against the first line of the Latin claim. Nothing happened. The stone was cold. Resistant. Then he remembered Scotland. Intent first. He pressed harder and said, "This wasn't theirs." The ring burned. Not enough to injure, enough to answer. A line of dark oxidation spread across the Latin words like fire running through dry grass. Controlled exact, canceling the declarative phrase without touching the older marks beneath. Ruth stepped closer. Again. Tony moved to the next line, to victory memory. He read quietly, then shook his head. No. He pressed the ring into the carving. This was not victory. More of the Roman inscription darkened and died. The chamber loosened with every sentence. The air warmed by a degree. The cracks in the walls stopped spreading. Somewhere deeper, a low grinding sound faded into silence. Callum watched the central pool and said under his breath, "Water levels holding." Tony reached the final declarative line. To those who enter. The city endures. He stared at it. That was the trick. Not just conquest. Legacy through possession. The idea that greatness survives because it owns what it found. Tony pressed the ring to the stone. One last time. The city doesn't endure by owning what it doesn't understand. The final line blackened. The older symbols beneath the Latin flared gold. And the chamber took one long, deep breath. Everyone felt it. The black pool sank by an inch. Then another, not draining away, settling, as if pressure somewhere deeper in the network had finally eased. The mosaic ring altered permanently. The Roman eagles did not vanish, but they moved to the edges of the design, diminished, framed by the older vault pattern now dominant at the center. History corrected, Tony thought, or at least told the truth for once. Then the chamber spoke one final meaning into all of them. Conquest closed. Threshold remains. The humble may pass. The claimant will break. The gold beneath the water dimmed. The memory columns faded. The room was only a buried chamber again. Old, cracked, dangerous, but no longer angry. Tony slid the ring off his thumb and set it back on the pedestal. Isla looked at him. "You're leaving it?" He nodded. "This one isn't for me." Ruth gave the smallest approving exhale. Callum checked the ceiling. "We should move. The structure's stable enough, but I don't trust old Roman engineering after a supernatural argument." "Fair," Tony said. They turned toward the western passage. Then Marcus's voice echoed faintly from beyond the upper ruins. Not close, but audible. "Tony!" Ruth stopped at once. Callum's hand went to his light. Isla half turned, eyes narrowing. "Don't," she said to Tony, voice low and sharp. He had his chance to pick a side. He picked Eleanor. Tony should have listened. Probably. Instead, he looked up toward the broken upper ledge and answered, "Bad habit, but apparently I don't." Marcus appeared above, alone this time, silhouetted against afternoon light filtering through the ruined hall beyond. "No, Eleanor. No operatives. Just Marcus, dusty and tight-jawed, and very clearly doing something Eleanor had not approved." He looked down into the chamber and spoke fast. "She's not leaving Rome." Ruth went still. Marcus kept talking. "She has another team moving toward the port archives. Not for this chamber, for shipping records. Old Roman transfer routes, later church records, anything that points to secondary threshold sites. She thinks the Italian vault is a hub, not a dead end." Tony's stomach tightened. "Why tell me?" Marcus laughed once. No humor in it, because she's wrong about one thing. You can't own a system that judges you, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. Ruth's eyes sharpened. Half a confession from inside a crumbling ruin. Charming. Marcus ignored her and looked only at Tony. "She'll go after Malta next." The name hit the chamber like a thrown knife. Not because the room reacted. This vault was done reacting, but because everyone in it knew a future line when it arrived. Tony frowned. "How do you know?" Marcus held up a thin waterproof folder. "Because the Roman archive routes overlap later hospitaler records. Island storage, containment architecture. Eleanor's already connected them." Ruth stepped forward. "Throw it down." Marcus didn't move. Tony looked at him and saw the problem immediately. Marcus was not becoming a keeper. He was not turning noble. He was trying to balance his own conscience against his own survival and hoping to land somewhere less damaged than Eleanor. Very human, very messy. "What do you want?" Tony asked. Marcus's face tightened. "There's a difference between learning and devouring," he said. "I needed to know if you'd see it." Tony almost laughed. "That's not an answer. It's the one I've got," Ruth said. "Marcus, last chance." Marcus looked at her then. "You don't trust me. Fair. But if Eleanor reaches Malta with uninterrupted lead time, you'll be reacting again instead of choosing." He tossed the folder. Callum moved first and caught it one-handed before it could hit the black pool. Marcus stepped back from the broken edge. "Next time," he said to Tony, "don't assume the smartest person in the room is the one talking most." Then he was gone. Silence. Ruth took the folder from Callum and flipped it open. Her expression darkened by degrees. "Is he telling the truth?" Isla asked. Ruth shut the folder. "Enough of it," Callum swore under his breath. Tony looked from one face to another. "Malta." Ruth nodded once. "Looks that way." The chamber gave a final low groan above them. Stone dust drifted down. A practical reminder that buried Roman architecture remained buried Roman architecture. Ruth gestured to the western passage. "Move." Debrief later. They began to climb out through the lower access tunnel. Single file, lights cutting through dust and old stone. Tony went second, Isla behind him. The tunnel angled upward through rough-cut passagework, and finally into open air at the edge of a broken olive terrace above the ruins. Evening had begun to lean across the countryside. The sky over Italy was turning iron blue, with a band of orange at the horizon. Birds wheeled in the distance. The air smelled of warm stone and rosemary. Below them, the old Roman site lay half exposed and half buried, beautiful in the way dangerous old things often are. Tony stood in the cool air and looked back once. The chamber below was sealed now, not invisibly, but honestly. The Empire layer had been corrected. The threshold remained, and for the first time since entering Italy, his chest eased. Not peace, just completion. Beside him, Isla brushed dust from her hands and looked out over the ruins. "You know," she said, "most people on a trip to Italy manage wine, museums, maybe too much pasta." Tony glanced sideways. "I can still do pasta. That confidence is medically concerning." He smiled, despite himself. Small, brief, real. Ruth joined them, folder in hand, Callum a step behind. "We leave in 10, Ruth said. "Eleanor's still in the country. She'll either double down tonight or pretend not to care until she can strike cleaner later." Tony looked toward the darkening horizon. "And Malta?" Ruth's face gave him the truth straight. Malta is no longer a maybe. Tony reached into his bag and took out the map. The Italian sight had dimmed. A new pulse lit farther south. An island, small, bright, surrounded by sea. Malta. The line between the 2 points looked older than Rome. Tony folded the map carefully. Then he said, "The only honest thing left. She's getting faster." Ruth nodded. "So are you," she said. And somewhere beyond the darkening sea, another vault was already waiting. The map shifted. South. Malta burned in gold. And something there was waiting. This is Story Run. Stay with the run.